I got a message from a viewer. I guess I'll call him John. His name's actually John. Anyway, he says, quote, unrelated to this video, but I always wanted to ask you something. I've heard you say on multiple occasions that you're not a socialist and not a communist. This is true. Quote, I feel as though you've not even put yourself on the left wing, not that it matters very much. So, close quote, I'll come back to this message. It depends on where I'm living. So if we move to Texas, I think I'm left wing in Texas. Quote, despite this, I can imagine you'd be critical of an American-style system which creates the incredible amount of inequality that it does. Pause. Right. His point is, can you speak to how you'd improve upon this American-style free market system without creating a Cuban or Venezuelan-style system? So this is question one. Question two, also, do you generally agree that inequity is the enemy of democracy? So the second question is the fastest to answer. So Melissa and I have been reading the ancient Greek. She's doing her own video, so I'm not going to attribute her. I'm not going to speak for Melissa. But the issue of equality is huge in Athenian democracy. It's huge and fundamental, and the world would be a better place if people had a better education in the ancient Greeks. There was a very simple line from Pseudo-Xenophon talking about the Constitution of Athens, and he says, bluntly in passing, a democracy is a country ruled by the poorest. Democracy is a system that puts government in the hands of the poorest. Right? That's something totally different from equality. Right? And that's my concern. I want government for the poor, of the poor, by the poor. And this was seen as both the advantage and the disadvantage of Athens, was that decisions were being made in the interests of the poor, by and for the poor. And of course, interestingly, a figure like Cicero, he's very much reacting against that. He's really an anti-democratic philosopher, although, he plays his cards carefully, so he doesn't seem like, too much of a fascist. And, Plato and many of these other people, the people who actually lived through the execution of Socrates, partly because they saw the death of Socrates. They were so shocked by that, a lot of them really became critics of democracy or somewhat anti. Many of the most eloquent philosophers we have that let us see the virtues of Athenian democracy were themselves harsh critics of Athenian democracy, and they were not comfortable at all with rule by the poor, and they pointed out, again, even Pseudo-Xenophon himself, he says, if you let the poor control government, they build these bathhouses. They build bathhouses and massage parlors, and they spend the government budget on the Olympic Games and festivals and, crowd-pleasing sports stadiums and shit. It's true. Poor aren't angels. But just say this is actually my concern, is not equality. Now, of course, with that having been said, obviously, when political power is in the hands of the poor or is functioning for the poor, when government is for and about the poorest, it's going to ameliorate the conditions of the poor. I don't think it creates equality per se, but it creates, for example, access to education and healthcare and roads and all kinds of benefits. So yeah. But this is a different conceptual design. And also, again, this reflects my fundamental nihilistic ethic, which is that I say, no, for me, ethics is about doing the best you can. That's very different from starting with a kind of geometric concept of equality. All right, so the other half of this, so he's asking, do you generally agree that inequality is the enemy of democracy? And my answer is no. The enemy of democracy is aristocracy. The enemy of democracy is oligarchy. The enemy of democracy is monarchy. I can throw it in, although today it's not as much of a threat. If you are ruled by an oligarchy, which is, in my opinion, what Canada is ruled by, to be blunt, we have a system of polite oligarchy. Then democracy takes that unequal triangle and turns it upside down. But it's still an unequal triangle. And, sure, it'll probably be better for the poor. Hard to see how it would be worse if you... just think about it. Sorry, Canadian Parliament has so many hundred seats. I don't have the number memorized. How many of them are occupied by poor people? How many of them are occupied by the poorest? To use Pseudo-Xenophon's, I mean really poor. I don't mean Obama. People talk about Obama. He was a professor of law at a major university. People talk about Obama as being poor. Well, he was poor compared to Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney was a multimillionaire. Donald Trump is a multimillionaire. So Obama, right? George W. Bush, multimillionaire. So compared to these people think Obama's poor. I'm not talking about law professors' salary. I'm talking about really poor people. How often do poor people even speak in Parliament? Never. But, my point is, no, this is taking that triangle and turning it upside down. It's not turning the triangle into a square. Okay, mixed metaphor? No? Does that make sense?